Afternoon, it's August 17th, right in the dog days of summer. Shohei Ohtani is still, I think, either injured or blasting the baseball out. And the English beat the Australians in the Women's World Cup final. World Cup semi-final are playing the Spanish, I think, in the final. So all kinds of exciting stuff going on. And there is a little bit going on in healthcare too. And we'll be to discuss that. It's THCB Gang. I'm Matthew Holt. Founder of the Healthcare blog and the leader of the gang here. And the gang today is Jeff Goldsmith from Health Futures Inc., Michael Millenson from Health Quality Advisors, Mike Magee, our medical historian, and Rosemarie Day from Day Health Strategies. And also semi-irrelevant, but kind of fun. It's not that the gang is 20 years old, but THCB is, believe it or not, 20 years old. So I was 60 and THCB is now, I was 60 a couple of weeks back and THCB is now 20. So it's been around a third of my life, which was good, bad, or different.
Congratulations.
It's some level of staying power for some of us. And all of you guys have featured a lot on THCB over the years. And I'm grateful for.
And in another 20 years,
and
half your life, Matthew.
Sorry?
In another 20 years, it'll be half your life.
You're right. if I last that long, which is a big question. Anyway, all right. So with that, I don't know if we started the 20th anniversary week with a bang because Jeff put up a paper which I thought was recanting all the stuff he told me in 1995. It was actually recanting all the stuff he told me in 1972. And so we'll talk about that. But and then
when you were 8 years old.
Right, I'll put up a couple. Put up a couple of my favorites later. I've got a couple more to come up this week, and piece from Mike and others. But let's go around the horn and see what people have been looking at. So I will start with you, Rosemarie.
All right. So I was just at the NASHP, so that's the National Academy for State Health Policy. They had their conference in Boston this year, and it was the biggest one they've ever held. Over 1,000 people came. They had to shut down the actual admissions because they were oversubscribed. And
you know how to run a conference. You find another seat if people will pay you money. That's speaking as the capitalist guy around a conference.
Well, not if it's the Boston fire marshal telling you that you can't have like more people in the room. In any case, they were just not, who knew there were that many health policy wonks out there. So, I mean, I think that's kind of exciting. And I had not been to the conference since COVID and all the things. And so seeing just like how many people are there working hard to manage the public health emergency unwinding was obviously a huge topic, but a lot of other things, and really focusing on how to do continuity of coverage was super encouraging. Other topics being addressed, like how do we contain healthcare costs, as state policymakers, and it's really focused on innovation and how states can share innovation with each other. And it is surprisingly apolitical, interestingly, because it is a lot of folks who are truly embedded in the mechanics of the programs like Medicaid and others. And so seeing how they come together to share ideas was frankly kind of heartening in this time that feels awfully terribly polarized. So I'll have more to say about all that, but it was a great week.
Fantastic. Mike Magee, what have you been up to? What are you looking at?
Well, I've been excited to come on and ask Jeff a question. I managed to
start talking. Hang on.
Yeah. I was loading a kayak on the top of my car late last week and managed to fall backwards and fracture my 10th rib, which was no big deal, except for the fact that it dropped my left lung. So then I had to be admitted to the hospital, and that all went well. Kudos to Hartford Hospital. They did a great job. But what I noticed, which surprised me, is that they were in no rush to get me out of there, which I'm not used to because it's usually just the opposite. And it was sort of like, once you're there, I might never get out. So I just wondered, has something changed, Jeff, or am I just imagining those days a decade ago where, you had to fight to stay in, and now it seems to be more difficult to get out? Maybe just the understaffing slows things down. I don't know.
You may just be a very likable patient. Well, I'm sorry to hear that, Mike. That sounds.
Mike, were you admitted?
Yeah.
You were there more than 2 midnights, right?
And how long did you stay?
I was there for 2.5 days, 3 days.
Are you a Medicare person
Yeah.
or?
I was
Yeah, I don't
Medicare.
get that. I mean, you're obviously when your DRG is up, they begin nudging you towards the door.
Right.
So I can tell you that managing down length of stay and doing what is now being called patient progression is a very, very hot topic. And
Yeah.
why that wasn't, apparent to you, maybe they just did a really good job of moving you through and you didn't even notice.
Yeah, that's possible.
Maybe you could have been there 5 days. And done 2.5.
I have a non-medical judgment based on my non-medical knowledge. I'm willing to bet that you are 10 years older now than you were 10 years ago.
Well,
Wow.
that's true too.
Wow.
And
That's
Statistics
a
has
dazzling
come up.
insight.
Statistics has
That-
really come on since my day, I tell you that.
that could affect how you get treated as well. That's just a non-medical guess.
All right.
All right, Michael, what have you been up to? What do you look at?
Well, of course, it's AI all the time and everything. And I have to say, I'm amused when I look at articles in JAMA Health Forum and the various consulting groups and everything about how AI is going to change healthcare. I have yet to see one article that kind of mirrored what I wrote in my Forbes column maybe 6-8 weeks ago about how it will empower patients to be independent of physicians. 100% of what I've seen is how we're going to be better doctors, educate our patients better, and keep them from being misinformed. Now, one thing about, well, wait a second, they might be able to get information independent of us that's reliable and enabling them to be more independent. Not one article on that, which is...
You are not reading the right things. If you were reading the futurology section of Reddit, which I've started reading, because no reasons why, somebody took Nuance, apparently did a study saying that they were at 96% or 98% accuracy of some kind of diagnostics and treatment recommendations. And the futurologist, somebody writing futurology in Reddit, announced that what this meant is that if you extrapolate out, it's going to be, you're not going to need a doctor. The machine will do it all for you.
So they go between not needing doctors at all, which is sort of absurd, and to everything else, how we're going to be better doctors, as opposed to how it's going to change a realistic relationship with the semantic web, apps available, and all the rest of that. So, back in the 70s, when doctors were afraid that automatic blood work was going to replace them, the famous informatician, Dr. Warner Slack, said, any doctor who can be replaced by a computer should be.
Well, I mean,
Good
so I'll go next because I have a non-medical example of exactly this that I experienced 2 nights ago, which I'll share with you, which is, so I live near San Francisco, which, as you may or may not know, is one of 3 places in America where the Cruise organization, which is a incredibly fast money-losing part of General Motors, is doing automated taxis. And so I was having a drink with a work colleague in a hotel up a hill, North Hill. San Francisco's hilly. And I thought I had parked my car in a parking lot about 6 blocks away, and I'm old and I played soccer with my son and my knee was hurting. So I said, well, I'd walked there. Perhaps I could get one of these Cruise. I was on the wait list and I finally got off the wait list, and now I can order a Cruise self-driving car, which only works at night. It only works between, I think, like 9 p.m. and 6 a.m. So only a few times you can actually use it. So anyway, I got on the app. I had to load my credit card. I ordered it. It wouldn't come to the hotel I was. It insisted on coming 2 streets parallel to it, which is quite a steep downhill in San Francisco. So then I walked down 2 blocks. Now I'm only 2 blocks from the parking garage. So then I see it coming. I'm on the corner waiting for it, and it streams past me at a great rate of knots, and then it stops. The name of the car, it was called Grasshopper. The actual car, the individual car is on the side. So it stopped about half a block away. So then I went and got in it. I attached my seatbelt to the stuff. I could hit a button to start it, and off it drives. And I'm going about 2 blocks to the entrance to the parking garage. But the parking garage is in a whole city block. It's a big multi-story car park. And it has the entrance I was going for was closed. So they didn't know what it was going to do. And what it did was the other entrance is kind of, you imagine there are 2 entrances kind of at this end. It took me to the end of the block at the other end, and then it turned right very skillfully around the block, stopped halfway through the block, and declared the ride over. So I was as far from either the closed entrance or the open entrance as I could have been. And actually, there's a button you can call a human being. There's no human being in the car. Apparently, people in San Francisco have been like having sex in the back seats and all kinds of stuff to see what you can get away with. It's San Francisco. And I called somebody. They said, "Yeah, you can't reroute the car at the drive you're in. You have to get out, but you can call another one." And I was now like half a block from my entrance, so I didn't want to pay another $6, so I gave up. But it was interesting because it was like so much of it was so amazingly great, and yet it was just not perfect yet. Struck me that's what AI in healthcare is going to be like for quite a while. Anyway, Jeff, you've already written a big piece this week, but tell us what else you've been up to, or talk about your piece.
No, I mean, I was brooding over this vertical integration thing for many months, and finally, I sent it to a bunch of my colleagues to tear it up, and finally sent it to you, and it's gotten a lot of visibility, and I think maybe struck a nerve. I think the proximate stimulus for it was the failure of Geisinger, which was a place that I was close to and had a tremendous regard for. And the idea that there was some magic to owning your own health plan and having a huge physician group and a hospital, that it was all, going to come together and they were going to be exactly like Kaiser. I mean, I'd sort of had enough. And I think this idea has failed, and it's created organizations that are almost impossible to manage. And they really have lost focus on the patient. I think a lot of vertical integration strategies were really about directly or indirectly acquiring me by buying the doctor or by buying the hospital that I use. There's this idea that they're growing the number of lives that are connected to them somehow, and that'd be okay if I got something out of it.
Right.
Wait.
Better service, a smaller bill. People that could see me the next day, whatever. There's no evidence that anybody has benefited from this strategy, including the organizations that have pursued it. So it was sort of like why are we continuing to do this after 50 years of fiddling with it? Why don't we move on and simplify what these organizations do so they can actually do a few things better? That was the thrust of it.
And I think it's a very well received piece. And I originally put up that when I first met you in 94, 5, 6, sometime back then, you were talking about virtual vertical integration. We were talking about virtual integration. That there's a question, I think, about, right, and this was the piece. I don't know if you saw the piece I put up, like from Blast from the Past from 2007,
I did,
about McKinsey. McKinsey said, how do you operationalize what Porter and Theisberg was saying, which was, you are, give up on the stuff you're no good at and you become the best people in the world at whatever service line it is. What happened clearly, rightly, wrongly, whatever you call it, is that there was a whole bunch of horizontal consolidation. You'll buy all the other hospitals in your region so you can be more aggressively, so your Sutter or your Advocate or whatever, you can more aggressively compete, bargain with the health plan. The UPMC strategy, and also, as you mentioned, there's a lot of, can we make sure that we tie up either the primary care groups to make sure they refer into our network, or we tie up the high performing specialists, and by doing a deal with them on a hospital or whatever to generate their referrals and make sure that they stay within us. And I don't know about the health plan side of it. There seems to me that the health plan side of it, all those organizations that have, small health plans, so if you take Kaiser and some extent Geisinger out of it, but Kaiser out of it, that have small health plans that are like little community health plans, with a few 100,000 lives or whatever attached to their organizations. That strategy doesn't seem to have really gone anywhere. But I'm still a little confused about what, if you go back to the Ford Rib Rouge car plant where everything happens in one place, a la Kaiser, right, compared to what do you think? How far do you think vertical integration actually got? And then if it's not working, which is what do you think we should do instead?
Well, a third of the docs in the United States practice are owned by hospitals. So the answer to your question is it's gone a very long way.
Right.
And an astonishing number of those physicians hate their employer,
Right.
hate the enterprise that they work for. The surgeon that replaced my hips, who was brilliant, was fired by the Sentara Medical Group because she was telling patients that they could get their surgeries done on the same day and didn't have to stay overnight at a huge financial cost to Sentara. They fired her, not for cause. They just sent her a letter saying, "You're gone." They didn't explain why. I think that a lot of that stuff is kind of going on. And I don't think, the idea that they acquired her in order to get me to use them, I don't know if that was, the original purpose. She had a lot of medical school debt, like a lot of docs do. I think the employment was in part because she didn't want all the business risk of owning her own practice. But guess what? She's now in private practice. She has a 5-month waiting list. People are beating down the door to get on her schedule. So I kind of think, and right around when we were talking, Matthew, was the very first surge of hospitals buying practices. And that was clearly vertical integration. The idea that you would own these practices and all the patients that saw those doctors would come to you. Well, I think that's a bankrupt strategy. Hospitals are probably going to lose their site of service payments that, dramatically overpay for the visit because because the practitioners are owned by hospitals. The practices themselves are losing 150 or 200 grand a doc. So when those site of service payments go away, there's going to be a lot of sort of come to Jesus meetings with the people that run these huge medical groups saying, how many of the 1,000 docs do we really need? How many of them would be missed if they left the community? Why are we in this business? So I think there are going to be a lot of those kinds of questions asked. Vertical integration went a long way, Matthew, to answer your question.
I think you've skipped over, though, the preceding strategic step that goes into these vertical integration strategies, and it basically is a geographic strategy.
Right.
So what they do, at least in the various different ones I've been associated with, the starting point is to draw a line around the geography that they want to control.
Sure.
And whether through purchase of the smaller hospitals, which they then spoke and chain to themselves, or whether it's in putting brick and mortar standard primary care practices in these various different settings. The basic strategy is a geographic strategy. Once you have the geography laid out, then of course you do need both facilities and you need healthcare professionals to staff them. And, like you said, dating back at least to the early 90s, they were able to attract primary care just by saying, I'll give you $300,000 for your practice. You only have to stay with us for 2.5 years. And then, if you don't like it, you can leave. And a lot of them did just that. So you do have a lot of this churning going on and over-promising. And for the last, I'd say, a couple of years now, severe problems with understaffing in primary care and scheduling problems and COVID complications and all of that. But at the end of the day, you're right. There is movement, right? I mean, your docs are saying the hell with this and they're going out, but still those vertical integrators own the geography. So
can I just say one
thing?
The
big question is then, what next will they do with their geography once they have to compete with people who they've alienated inside of their geographic borders?
That's definitely the next. But the one thing I would say is that for basically 30 years, it wasn't that geographic. I mean, whether you go vertically up or down, but the geographic spread, owning almost all your own, within a metro area, so that the health plan cannot kick you out of the plan, was incredibly successful. And that's the reason why those systems got so big and so rich and have the vast reserves they're sitting on. But anyway, I think
let me guys tell you
what's next, right? What happens next?
I'll tell you a little story, which is, one of my Mike, that was the substance of my practice.
Yeah.
It was really it was sort of like a game of Risk.
Yep.
where you're putting, the cannons and the ships and
Building a
whatever
land war in
on
Asia.
geography and trying to control more space. But
Yep.
one of my clients, and I was with him for a decade, they started out doing that. And then they began buying the lucrative subspecialty practices of
Yeah.
their investor-owned competitor and, took away 8 share points from these guys. And then the fund started, and a lot of their core practitioners in the same specialty said, "You made an incredible deal for my competitors. Why don't you do it for me?" And by the time all of that was done, they had a 750 person medical group that was losing, $200 million a year.
Right.
That's
Yeah.
what's happened to this strategy. So
Yeah.
if you were just able to confine it to the primary care docs in a given area or a region, that's not what happened.
Right.
There were a lot of communities where the cardiologists hired consultants to
Wow.
come in and start a bidding war among
Yeah.
the different hospitals to see who would get all their caths and all their open heart procedures. And they ended up getting 600 or 700 grand a year. That's vertical integration.
Yep.
Okay,
All
so,
right, Rosemarie, then Michael.
okay, so I heard you say, Matthew, it's been an incredibly successful strategy coming straight out of a place where the lens is actually what is working for, what's affordable for
Oh,
society.
you're talking about like for people and patients and the I was talking about the bottom line of the hospital.
Well, yes, and I
Maybe it's
love
cynical.
how you've embraced capitalism. So
I'm not sure it's capitalism, given they're all non-profits and they work in oligopoly. It's not Adam Smith's capitalism, really. But yeah, go ahead, Rosemary. Sorry.
But you're right. I mean, Rosemarie's right.
You're dead right.
How does the society benefit from this stuff?
So there's a wonderful professor who has spoken a number of times, Aaron Fuse Brown, who studies the consolidation, particularly horizontal. So building these massive systems, and what that has effectively, successfully done is driven up price, and whoever is paying that, whether it's big employers, through their insurers, or it's Medicaid struggling to cover some costs, or Medicare, all of us paying for what that has wrought. And it is completely, it's going to do us in, because we as a society can't afford those prices to be so high. And so there's the strategies.
I'm going to remind you of this. I'm sharing it very briefly for those who are listening. 1990, we were at 12% of GDP. By 2011, when all this went on, we were at 17%.
Matthew,
Not
It's been
unconnected.
dead flat for the last
It
13
has
years.
been dead flat for the
Dead
first.
flat.
For
So
the
why
last-
did you show it to us?
Well, I'll show you.
1975.
But that happened in the 90s. There's a reason why this happened. The shift in power happened in the 90s and the 2000s.
Right.
And I agree. Since then, it's been problematic for everybody. But Rosemary's point is still true.
So
But
through the
Rosemary-
lens of the individual with medical debt and all that there's this whole yin and the yang, but that is the conundrum. And so success is, it's like beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Same with success. Anyway,
Well,
Jeff.
But I'm making a different point, which is even at the narrow issue of, did it help the institutions that pursued it? My answer is no. So forget about whether the society paid a huge cost for all of these largely unmanageable entities. It hasn't really helped the organizations that pursued it. And I thought the Geisinger bankruptcy or whatever it was, where they ended up selling themselves or renting themselves to Kaiser, was an absolutely classic example. They pursued the entire playbook. And it's interesting that Glenn Steele, the person that turned around Kaiser, the key to his turnaround was de-Kaiserizing the place.
Well, so I heard Steele
Converting it from an HMO to a PPO, severing the capitated contract between the group and the health plan. He de-Kaiserized it because the strategy wasn't working. He was smart enough to realize that there was something wrong with the model. And the people that came and succeeded Glenn basically mumbled their way into losing their franchise.
Michael.
I heard Glenn make a speech, private speech. I happened to be visiting Tom Delvenko at Harvard, talking to them, and he was asked about that, money back and the cold cabbage thing that he got all the publicity about and how he could afford it. And he said, because in a private setting, that's all the journalists and everything, is that basically they could charge what they wanted to the commercial plans because they were the big kahuna in the area. And that's what enabled them to subsidize this other kind of, value-based stuff, because they could get what they wanted.
Well,
Go ahead.
they actually made the windfall on Medicare Advantage, which is also a hot topic right now.
And yeah, which is very disappointing. See, George Halverson, who knows both Kaiser and the commercial, to sort of just say everybody who criticizes us is an ideologue who doesn't understand the numbers. I mean, it's disappointing for George to turn into a true believer for the whatever.
For United and Humana.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the shocking part.
That's exactly what I mean, is that you look at United Humanities and you just know what it's been. And here he comes from the Kaiser and the group health world, and he's basically saying nothing to see over here. So what I wonder about, Jeff, so the example you gave of Centera and what Matthew said about smaller health plans is I thought about how when HMOs first came out, Rush Press in Chicago had a health plan.
And Michael Reese.
Right. And they lost their shirts because they let the doctors sort of basically do whatever they wanted, and they couldn't make any money. And now you see Centera basically doing the opposite, saying we're small with a health plan, but we're going to enforce rigid economic discipline, even if it means firing docs. The question I wondered about the benefit to the organizations was I was thinking of UPMC, right, which totally dominates that area in a nonprofit. And basically, they make a huge amount of money. They have the horizontal integration, they have the vertical integration. And sort of why, if you're ruthless and dominate, why isn't it a good strategy?
Well, but you look at their numbers, they've had a couple of brushes with losing money for all that market dominance. If you look at their health plan, most of it's Medicaid. And it has, they've flirted with a 94 or 95% MLR.
Really?
So it's not obvious that integration has produced benefits even for the big guys.
So it could be the horizontal, then don't worry about the vertical, because they beat up, as you know, they have a whole long running feud with the local blues plan. Yeah, it could be. My daughter lived in Pittsburgh, and she had, of course, the UPMC health plan, and then she went to a UPMC hospital for an ER. She got an issue, and she was confused as to why the health plan and the hospital seemed to be sending her different financial information, right? And I had to explain.
Well, it's integration.
Just because you're at the hospital and you did things there doesn't mean that the health plan knows about that. And,
Well, I had a little thing that I kind of threw away towards the end of that piece in Matthew's blog, where I said, I wonder how many of these health system owned health plans are actually paying themselves less than the local Blue Cross plan.
Right. That'd be
so they can compete.
Well, right.
And how many of them
yeah.
do their 1,000 person or 1,500 person physician groups pay their docs an RVU? Even though they're allegedly managing population health. Well, those are two research questions I plan on pursuing here in the next 4 or 5 months with some friends of mine.
But here's the other question, actually, is also, are you building in more bureaucracy and cost to try to manage the two parts of your thing, right, than you would if you had an arm's length relationship?
Yeah, you are. And again, organizations where if you ask the CEO the question, what business are you in? You end up getting mumbling. We're in everybody's business. We're improving the health of our community. That's what we're doing. But, trace it back into all of those boxes and that message sort of disappears. And honestly, I think a lot of these folks are idealistic enough to believe that they're actually doing that. I'm just saying it's not clear to me that they are doing it in an efficient way that is sustainable for them, let alone, Rosemarie, the communities that they are serving. Because it hasn't reduced cost. And it hasn't apparently improved operating performance. So if you're not doing either of those things, pardon me, what the hell are you doing?
Well, if you're the CEO of a combination hospital and health plan, that certainly would justify a larger salary, Jeff.
No comment. You were probably going to bring up Lloyd Dean's $35 million parting.
Who was going to mention Lloyd Dean? Lloyd Dean made a very good joke.
But I forget, does UPMC have its own helicopter or its own airplane? I forget which.
It had two Bombardier Global Expresses, 2, which are bigger than Gulfstreams, that they were
Yeah,
using
I
to
know.
fly Docs and Jeff, what's his name, who retired over to
Michael
Europe.
yeah,
2 Global Expresses.
2.
Two.
His joke wasn't as good when he couldn't remember how much money he could pay. Was it 6 million or 7 million? That's always a tricky one. But anyway.
Yeah, I can't remember. He actually interviewed me for a position as a strategy person in the mid or late 90s when he took over, and he made a point of showing me his 93-foot yacht in the process of the interview. And I was like, okay, let's party.
Jeff, I like to say that UPMC puts the profit into not-for-profit.
Well, but they're not even a very efficient business. And that bothers me as much as any of this other stuff.
Well, and I did meet Bill Peduto, the mayor of Pittsburgh, at a conference once, and he did point out to me the 2 biggest businesses in his city were the University of Pittsburgh and Carnegie Mellon, Medical Center and Carnegie Mellon University, and neither of whom paid property tax, which he thought was
right.
So there was controversy about that. I think the local folks tried to actually impose property taxes on them and might even have succeeded.
I can't remember. So let's go on a little bit from this, right? Which is, I mean, I guess I read a piece a few weeks back saying how I was cynical about everything now, because I kind of believe, and to go back to Rosemary's points, how do we make this better in a kind of, how do we make healthcare delivery and the social impact a bit better in an American capitalist system, if that's possible? And I said, well, I kind of thought that when I started out, we were going to have universal care, something a la Clinton plan. We were going to have some level of devolved capitation a la Kaiser or the Southern California experiment or Oak Street or whatever in Medicare Advantage. And then so technology / population health management companies / technology improvement / telehealth / whatever that sort of digital health stuff was going to be the stuff that made care delivery much more efficient. And that's where you get to universal care done in the American capitalist way, but cheaper and more effective. Clearly I was pipe dreaming for the last 30 years, but is there a way, Jeff, that you or anybody else, can see that we can take from what we have now, which is big sclerotic systems, which by the way are now merging, like the one in North Carolina is merging with the one in Illinois for God knows why, but it is, right? And we have this huge overhanging massive health plans, which, as you mentioned, United, Humana, elephants. I keep thinking of elephants.
It is elephants. I mean, they paid someone for that name.
Who are doing things and are playing games. There was a piece in ProPublica about how they're all forcing doctors now to take, payment cards and which get a 3% cut or a 5% cut of the payments, and all this stuff going on. Is there a way we can get from here to something that, is more rational and more effective with the community? What's your sense about what the next step is here, Jeff?
I mean, I was an advocate of virtual integration and of delegated risk capitation, which was the model that Pacific Air and HealthNet and a lot of the other Pacific Coast health plans pursued. And the reason why I thought that was a good idea was because it put power in the hands of multi-specialty physician groups and got out of their hair at the same time. We're not going to make you bill for every time you drop a test. We're just going to pay you at the end of the year, and you can have a share of our profits. I thought that was a much more efficient model. And apropos of Kaiser, I think the reason why Kaiser has been successful in the markets it's been in wasn't its vertical strategy at all. It was that it empowered its Permanente medical groups, which are very fine, high quality, subspecialty medical groups, to be the dominant policymaking entity in the enterprise. And, to me, I think that those groups are really the key. That's the infrastructure that we need to be building on and supporting. And I think it's very interesting that United Healthcare's strategy is to buy about half of them.
But if you look at them now, right? So you have United buying a bunch of those multi-specialty groups. You still don't have enough of them with enough experience of taking that kind of risk and capitation, which we still don't have 30 years later.
Right.
And then the ones that were put on purpose built to do that are either, flailing out like Kano, or have sold out to the retail folks like CVS, like Oak Street with CVS. And it's been, or One Medical and Iora are now part of Amazon or what have you. It's been very hard to build those groups, even though rationally it should look like you should be able to that sounds like a better way to go. It strikes me that we don't have a sense of how to do that well.
But it's not necessarily, the issue of how you build them is a really interesting question. But the tragedy of Geisinger is that was a spectacular multi-specialty group, one of the best in the country, and emulating Mayo. You've got in Boston, in Rosemarie's part of the world, you have Atrius, you've got Leahy Clinic, you've got some spectacular subspecialty medical groups that really are practicing state-of-the-art medicine and that are very influential in the care process. In Los Angeles, Los Angeles is a market that's
Atrius, which has
dominated.
been acquired by Optum.
Exactly.
So,
Optum.
But what's the purpose of these acquisitions? If the purpose of the acquisitions is to acquire lives, I think the lives have a vote. And if they go in and say, you know what, it was sort of fun being Atrius for a while. I mean, we had, Gene Lindsay, who was a great leader,
right.
But now we've got these, like consultants coming in from, blah, de blah, and they're telling us that we've got to double our productivity or we really won't have a business. And, they want to change our compensation formula and they're treating us like dirt. If that's the case, these acquisitions are worse than useless. And that's, Optum Health completely changed out its leadership here in the last 2 weeks. And I think a part of it was, what are we going to do with all these high quality assets? How do we get them to continue performing at a very high level, even though they're now a part of this vast machine? And how do we get the non-United health plans to continue contracting them with them in a way that they trust what we as the new owners are going to do with them? So I think it's I think United's strategy is very much along the lines of what I discussed. Their care infrastructure is not, skeezy, single specialty physician groups. It's large, very well organized, high quality multi-specialty medical groups. The Everett Clinic, they've got, the former Fallon Clinic, now called Reliant. These were high performing clinical enterprises. And I think the architecture that we need for our health system as a whole is based on those. Whether we get to the health system you are talking about, Matthew, by United buying all of them is going to be a fun question to watch.
I want to agree with Jeff and just sort of bridge it a little bit. What Jeff described, I think, is what organization of our healthcare system would give us the highest quality, most cost-effective care. And I know when I started looking at this in the mid 80s, like that was obvious to me that the well-run multi-specialty groups were the way to go. So I ended up, being involved with American Medical Group Association, people like that. The question that you're asking, Matthew, is how do we get American society to adopt the goals that that of universal care and blah 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 blah, and it's a different question, because what we haven't mentioned is we're now in a bunch of states kicking people off Medicaid, and if you looked at it rationally, it's not even an economic thing to do. And if you look at it, are they doing it in a justifiable way, right? All right, they all ought to work. Well, it's mostly just people who have, clerical mistakes. So it's simply an act of social revenge, which actually is some of the people who they want, right? And so the goal of universal health care is in some ways antithetical to the current vibe of a lot of America, that, even though they're the ones who are benefiting, right, deserve it. And what Jeff described about the multi-specialty groups, none of us for a moment 10 years ago, much less 20 or 30 years ago, envisioned private equity coming in, or insurers changing what they're doing, or, large hundreds of billions of dollars of companies. And the problem is, if you don't have a national strategy, if at any point you move money to one particular solution, you end up with people coming in and distorting that solution for short-term quarterly profits. And so while you can look at Optum and say, yeah, what they're doing is it, but Are they going to become a national solution? Is CVS or Walgreens or anybody, right? So the kinds of things, every time there's a grassroots solution that seems to attract funding, since we don't have a national payment strategy or other strategy, people come in and distort it. And so it's not that the architecture that Jeff is describing is wrong. It's absolutely the rational way to go. And if we had like the German system or even the Israeli system, right, we could do it. But if you have a payment system that distorts the architecture, there is no architecture that works because everything gets, sort of thrown out of whack by short-term profit seeking with no national social consensus on goals, much less a national strategy, which is kind of a shame.
So Rosemarie, this is where you come and explain how it's all going to be fixed, given what you heard last week. Stop laughing and say something.
Well, you're saying national strategy, and this is a conference that really focuses on what states can do because tackling a national strategy is just so, seems almost impossible other than doing like pockets of innovation, and they're retooling like what the CMMI group is going to be doing and all of that. So this really is more, can states do something within their borders because in some ways the health system stuff is fairly local. The big ones are still serving a very local community. And it is talking about a different version of global payments, or, trying to put some constraints around just ever rising prices. And in order to make sure that the coverage goals and the access goals can be met and afforded by not just the government payers, but the private sector payers that are crying uncle. So I do think there has to be government involvement. And I hear you about like Germany or Israeli kind of system. I just don't think at this stage there's some magic national solution. It just feels like too much of a behemoth.
We're certainly not getting a national legislation. We have a.
What do you think of Maryland?
We have a split Congress.
Yeah.
We have the interesting thing where the presumptive Republican nominee is going to be tried 4 times between now and the next election. I don't know where we're getting towards the national.
I will say this.
Say something about the states.
Well, here's something that really struck me at this conference. The slides that people would have up on the massive, they were like, okay, here's our, the government payers are Medicaid, Medicare, marketplace. And, I started, with a team, the first marketplace, we called it an exchange, the connector. But, that was in 2006. I mean, okay, to my young folks, that's going to sound like the forever ago. But, here in my lifetime, I mean, we have an entire new component that was a figment of people's imagination not that long ago. So I was very struck by like how institutionalized marketplace is when it was this thing politically that was, said indicted former president was, vowing to repeal on day one, which did not happen. And in fact, it is so established now, people aren't talking about repealing it, and in fact, talk about building upon it. So I think we're doomed to incrementalism, but I was heartened by the fact that this was actually a pretty big increment since Medicare and Medicaid came about in 1966, and that's a heck of a long time ago, right? So I'm trying to find some positives in our incrementalist way. We did actually come up with a new component of a national solution, though there's a heavy state by state aspect to it, but there's still some pretty big federal part. Now, those government payers, and really looking at California as a model for this, is how do you bring the government payers together to try to move, put some constraints on, I guess I would say, just rampant capitalist system, by also putting public employees into the mix. So putting there, and when you look at how much government is purchasing in California, there is actually, I do think, some opportunity to affect the market.
Do you think that there is, I mean, I'm with you, but do you think the conversations that you were having the last week, right? So yes, you've got the marketplace, which against private plans. Medicaid, predominantly private plans. Medicare, about half private plans now. A lot of fuss, especially obviously Medicare and Medicare Advantage, about how much should you get paid and all the stuff that Michael was complaining that George Halverson was over promoting, etc. All that stuff. Did you hear stuff about how we can, do best practices for combining all that in California and having that spread? And maybe it goes to the blue states or whatever, and maybe even some of the red states pay attention? Or were they much more at the conversation level of, we're losing people from enrollment here, or we've got a small problem with, substance abuse there or whatever? I mean, it seems to me it's really hard to try to make even a sort of general statewide policy that can fix stuff, unless you're in Maryland, right, where they had the same thing since 1927 or whatever.
So I will say this, there were several major sessions that were for state employees only. And that included some of the heavy duty there was a lot of talk about cost containment. There were plenty around the plenaries, but then there were state only sessions where I do imagine some of this is being talked about. I mean, but I wouldn't say California has it all figured out yet. But when you look at the math of like how, how much, if you add up all the government payers, they're covering of the marketplace. I mean, I don't mean marketplace exchange, but the whole, as a purchaser, it is sizable. And, as California innovates, I think it's clear that others would follow. Somebody asked, I think Michael, you asked what I thought about Maryland. That has been an imperfect solution in terms of the global budget, right?
Imperfect solution. I've actually been looking into the numbers, and it's really, they've had basically price controls in Maryland for 50 years, 1974. You would expect that Medicare spending in the state would be significantly lower than its neighboring states, or states that don't have any rate controls at all. Total Medicare spending in 2021 per capita in Maryland was $11,900 per capita. It was $9,500 in Virginia and $10,600 in Pennsylvania, the two neighboring states. Wisconsin, $10,200, Minnesota, $11,450, and Oregon, with one of the most advanced managed care infrastructures in the country, $8,600. Now I realize the states are not commensurable.
What's I'm curious what Massachusetts was.
28,000.
Massachusetts. I don't know what Massachusetts was. Massachusetts was pretty high,
more,
but not as high as.
Just because that would be an interesting comparator, because I think that there's a lot of similarities.
I spent about a day wandering around in Kaiser Family Foundation State Health Facts, and that's where a lot of this stuff came from. The thing that was shocking to me was Maryland's system was designed to cap private insurance rates through an all-payer model.
Right.
Private health insurance per capita spend in Maryland, $5,000. In Virginia, $4,400. In Pennsylvania, $4,800. So even in Oregon, $4,600. Again, they don't have Baltimore's in all those states, but I mean, 50 years of this, you'd expect there to be a significant incremental difference, e.g. lower, between what private insurers are paying in a state that has capped cost shifting for 50 years and what we've actually got. So Maryland, you look at the numbers and Maryland doesn't look so good.
That's interesting.
The winners in Maryland were Care First and Hopkins.
Really?
Yeah, because they put a floor under Hopkins' uncompensated care spend. The biggest winners were Care First and Hopkins.
Yeah, well, I'd be interested to see the Massachusetts comparison, just because I think Maryland could argue, well, we're lower than them, and if we hadn't, we would be at like the Massachusetts level.
Massachusetts is surprisingly low. I can go on the State Health Facts and look at the numbers. Massachusetts is surprisingly affordable. And I guess I may be completely full of BS here and not remembering what I saw, but go on Kaiser Family Foundation State Health Facts and fiddle around. You basically can put up a map that shows all these different indicators by state and move around and see where they're at. I was really surprised that Maryland wasn't a whole lot cheaper than all these other places after 50 years of controlling hospital cost, and they aren't.
Pretty surprising. There was an article in, I think it was in Stat or ProPublica just in the last week about a system. I think it was in, I've never heard of it. I think it was in Southern Virginia that had merged with another system and was and was charging a lot more. And the answer, the basic response, the basic conclusion you would come to is that the only way we can deal with this, we can't manage competition amongst systems. We can only manage price fixing or price controls. And as you said, but historically in any of the political scientists among us would say price controls will always get taken over and subverted by the industry who runs them. And you end up with the Defense Department, right, where sure it's all price control, but in fact it's very, very lucrative. The taxpayer gets screwed.
So I will say this, and
Rosemarie,
again,
then
I
Jeff.
know we're talking about the imperfectness, but at the conference, one of the officials from CMS who's said that they are going to be announcing soon a state total cost of care model that states can apply to emulate. It would be a bit like Maryland, but not entirely. And the idea is to try and rebalance spending in order to invest more in primary care and population health type things. And so there would be some aspect of global budgeting. So details are not yet out there, but I thought that was an interesting development.
I mean,
Well, it's sort of a statewide ACO.
yeah.
Maybe.
It's basically a shadow system. You don't change any of the way people are paid, but you give people bonuses if at the margin they can figure out how to not spend as much as their share of the global cap. The ACO, of course, has been a stunning success.
Well, I mean, it comes down to what do the CMMI say? There are 57 different payment systems tried. Only 5 of them had any positive results at all.
Well, Maryland was supposed to be one of them.
Yeah.
But when I went and looked at the numbers, I was not dazzled by what I saw.
Yeah. So
I mean, it is the point I wanted to make is, this was my big argument with Uwe Reinhardt for 30 years. Uwe pretended like we were a social democracy that just wasn't doing a very good job. We're not. We are an interest group democracy.
Yep.
The most powerful interest groups in most states are the State Medical Society and the State Hospital Association. The most powerful enterprise in Maryland is Johns Hopkins University. When I was at the University of Chicago, I wanted a state rate review system because I couldn't figure out another way for us to survive with 31% Medicaid than having a floor put under our rates. I was an advocate of a statewide rate regulation system and came within an eyelash of getting it, only to see it evaporate with Ronald Reagan's election. So, I mean, from an interest group democracy standpoint, big interest groups like the idea of reducing their risk.
Well, and the surprise billing law tells us, right? Something which was high profile, Republican, Democratic line, isn't this awful? But when you saw how the law actually came out, it was a balance of some very powerful interest groups. And if that's the case for surprise billing, which the public understood, simple, all the rest of that, when you start to get to the lot more complex things like rate setting for Medicare and Medicare Advantage risk adjustment corridor, the interest groups win.
Right.
There's no question about it. By the way, Jeff, we talked about the rate setting in Illinois. I remembered when I first started writing about healthcare as a journalist for the Chicago Tribune, I went to a meeting of a bunch of a business group, which was in favor of that kind of price controls. And somebody from one of the oil companies stood up and talked about how prices were out of whack and healthcare cost too much and we needed government price controls. And I stood up and I said, you're from an oil company. A lot of people think that oil prices are out of control and you guys fight that. Why is that okay for not for an oil company? And they told me that's the last time we're having reporters here to ask questions.
Yeah, that free market stuff doesn't play.
That free market stuff. And just to go to nonprofits again, you might recall that during the oil crisis, the oil industry would put out things saying, only 3% of what we get is profit or 5% is profit. And of course, that's right, because when you have a 50-story office building with solid oak desks and airplanes everywhere, that's overhead, not profit.
Well, I think that's true. Talking about that, I'm going to bring it before we go. I'm going to bring this back to the minor point I didn't mention about my self-driving car adventure, which was that Someone's actually gone out and looked at this, and the whole point of self-driving cars, not the whole point. Obviously, the whole point of self-driving cars is that I don't have to drive myself home from the pub and I've had too many beers. But if you go to the sort of more subtle point about it, the idea was that, you reduce accidents and blah, blah, blah. And maybe you believe that's coming, maybe not. There's a bunch of back and forth on that. But the biggest point was that we were going to remove the most expensive part of the equation out of the driving and taxi industry, which is, of course, the driver or the taxi, the person driving it. Now, right now, apparently Cruise is losing, 2-3 billion a year. And I don't know how much Waymo, which is the Google, version of it, is losing. And, I don't know how much Tesla is doing on its self-driving and et cetera, whatever, how much they've invested. It's clearly coming. It's coming at some point. You can argue back and forth. It's going to be coming. But right now, for the charges that they are offering in San Francisco, it's actually the same price to take one of these self-driving cars as if to take an Uber with a real human being behind the wheel. So, at some point, if you could put this over to healthcare, Michael's point about when are the doctors going to be replaced, or the going to be replaced by AI. At some point, the idea is to take what's the biggest cost in healthcare. It's just like driving, right? It's labor.
People.
People. You've got to figure out some way, if technology is going to work in any way, it's got to start removing people somewhere in the equation. Hopefully, what Rosemarie and Mike were talking about, you can maybe use some of that money to spread care and more effectively across the population. And so it's not just Kim Kardashian having her full body scan MRIs, whatever she was advertising last week. You may all have missed that. But
Thankfully,
it's a de novo. You can get a whole body scan for like $800 or some $2,000 or some number, and Kim Kardashian thinks it's a great idea. So Michael was giving his non-clinical advice. Kim Kardashian's giving hers. All the same.
She has way more followers than I do.
Yeah, it may be a bit more influential. She had more followers, more money, and and a more interesting cosmetic bags. I won't.
We're looking for, I believe. But go ahead.
Her sex tape was probably better watched than yours was. Is all I can say, Michael. All right. We're coming to the end of It's obviously one thing. We're coming to the end of another hour here, so I want to just quickly go around and see what people are expecting next. Mike, let's start with you.
Well, because this is your 20th anniversary and you just had your 60th birthday, I wanted to hold this up. I don't know whether it's reading backwards or not.
Wonderful.
No, but this is an Emerson quote, a tribute to you, Matthew, for all you do. And, we may not have solved all of the problems, but hopefully we've remembered that there are people involved and relying on other people, and people are trying to do the right thing, and we've got to keep plugging at it.
Fantastic. I'm not sure my children see God in me, more like the devil, but we'll see. We'll see how that goes. But I really appreciate that. That's very kind. All right, Rosemarie.
Wow. Well, I was going to be, Mike, that's tough to follow. I was going to do something since you went into this Kim Kardashian thing, which I can't abide. I don't know if you all have seen Barbie, the movie, but if you haven't,
not yet, but Jane Sarason Khan.
It was a lot of. I thought it was a lot of fun.
Jane Sarason Khan's an avid Barbie collector from like the 60s, written books about it. Told me I had to go, so I'm gonna go.
I highly recommend it. I think Greta Gerwig is genius in how she tackled some pretty big issues in a really fun way. And yes, once upon a time, I used to play with the Barbie dolls, and it crosses the generations in terms of interest, and extremely well done. So I'll just throw that out there in a lighthearted moment.
Well, next time you want the Barbie implications for healthcare. Jeff,
I'll think about that.
Think about that. Jeff.
I mean, what I've enjoyed about the blog is that it's tapped into successive generations of Silicon Valley and San Francisco innovative energy. And it's like one of the places that I can turn to kind of find out what's going on in what ought to be at least the growing edge of medical technology and innovation. So, I mean, it's been fun being a part of it. We actually met face-to-face in 2007, Matthew, at a global business network conference in Cleveland, Ohio. And that was our first
That was
face to
I
face.
thought we met in the 95.
No,
I saw you on stage. I don't know
You
if I
might
met
have seen me, but we didn't meet until the Global Business Network. And I started writing for the blog 16 years ago after that meeting. I'd never heard of it. I didn't even know what a blog was.
I'm not sure I do now.
It's just been so much fun. I my only regret is that the comment threads that used to be so lively and full of energy have fallen off like the prehensile tail of a historic beast.
It's bad. They've been
No comment threads anymore.
killed by spam, Twitter, and LinkedIn. It's just
it's too bad.
It's sad, but
It's been a lot of fun.
You go back to the ones 10, 15 years ago, they were great. And anyway, fantastic. But thank you, and thanks to all of you guys for writing on the blog and being part of this over the years. Michael, I need to put your piece up because you do have the greatest ever piece on the healthcare blog, which is the explanation of whether healthcare is one word or two. And you can't.
That's true. And so David Muhlstein has sat me down and done a Google search of the usage of one word or two throughout the world, as different countries with different healthcare systems and in America, to prove to me that healthcare should be one word. And of course, it's now been adopted by Health Affairs, even though nursing home is not one word, but that is a classic. Matthew, as you know, you and I met in 1995 when you were still with Institute for the Future.
Sure.
And I was one of the first contributors to the healthcare blog. Back when you were looking for people to contribute to it, not
I'm still looking for people to contribute to it. Any of you are what? Mike
not beating
Really,
away PR
Michael,
people.
don't write enough. The ones I'm trying to avoid are the people who write to me from, I'm the SEO optimist from Optimizer from Calcutta. Can I please write an article about planes on your blog? I get too many of those.
Exactly. There's a lot of those. I get some as a contributing editor. It's been fun. It fulfills a unique function. I think Jeff's right, not just Silicon Valley, but you can do stuff that's thoughtful without being pontificating, like certain other blogs that we know of that now go to the pontificating side of things, or simply presenting yourself as, I believe, Jeff, you've noticed that everyone is a thought leader, whether or not they have any thought followers. I've thought of saying that I'm one of the premier thought leaders in the Portland cement industry, but somebody from the Portland cement industry might notice. So it's been great. I never played with a Barbie. My daughter didn't, my sister didn't, but it's a great movie and you'll enjoy it. Anyway, it's a great satirical movie. And, the healthcare blog gang, to me anyway, is just a wonderful way of both meeting people, seeing old friends, and keeping my brain cells working. I think there's a lot of really thought-provoking things that we do here. And that's really good for all of us. I think it's good cross-fertilization for everyone. Much better than some other conference kinds of things, which are not. And so, Matthew, I think what you're hearing is we all appreciate you.
I really appreciate all of you. So that has brought us to the end of the sort of 20th birthday party. Should have brought some champagne out, had hats and what have you. Didn't get around to that, which was another episode of THCB Gang. The gang is not 20 years old. The gang is we did in the pandemic. It was just Damas's idea. So less than 3 years old. Not 3 years old, I think the gang is. But the blog itself, the first article, by the way, in the blog, which I should put up again, was why Medicare doesn't work because it's fee for service. As Jeff said, 20 years later, we're still having the same damn argument. Mm-hmm. So you have been listening to Matthew Holt from San Anselmo, Marin County, California, Jeff Goldsmith from the wilds of Virginia, Michael Millenson from the very, I'm sure, cool and pleasant climes of Chicago at the moment, Mike Magee from the crazy space of Connecticut, and Rosemarie Day from the state of Massachusetts, where apparently no one gets divorced. As I was reading about on Reddit the other day, it's very hard to get divorced, especially being married more than 20 years, and they have the lowest divorce rate in the country. So who knows what they spend on healthcare, but they spend the least on divorce lawyers. That's what I found out. So that. And that's it. I'll be back soon with another issue in the healthcare, the THCB gang, and look forward to listening for all of you. Thanks for watching or listening on the podcast, and we'll see you all hopefully next week. Will be another episode. Thanks so much, and bye.